Hey there, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be kind of a continuation on my last video about the X32 and M32 series consoles and systems. In that video I kind of went over the basics of the console and kind of developed basically how to get from straight out of the box, the console straight out of the box, and get to a professional sounding mix with a good workflow and good surface space. Today I want to go over some more advanced ways to look at the console, some ways to kind of get the console to do things that right out of the box it wasn't set up to do. And again, let me state, like I did at the start of that original video, that the out of the box functionality, the out of the box surface and routing of the console works. You don't have to do anything weird to get the console to work. Just for today I'm going to kind of look at some more advanced things, and in particular I'm going to tackle some of the criticisms that are kind of thrown at the X32 and M32 systems, some criticisms that I don't think are warranted, or at the very least they're a bit overblown. Now if you saw the thumbnail for this video, you'll see that I mentioned about the SQ series and the Avantis by Allen and Heath, and don't get me wrong, I want to say right up front that those are great consoles, absolutely dynamite, nothing wrong with those consoles, but a lot of people compare the X32 and M32 consoles to those Allen and Heath boards, and I feel like a lot of people don't look at the full potential of the X32 and M32. For example, first thing I wanted to talk about was the fader space. Depending upon how you count, this is a 48 channel console. You have 32 main faders and then 16 other faders that are just decided for you on what they're going to be. And I think a lot of people kind of miss that, because even on an Avantis, you have to kind of put your returns somewhere. On an X32, you have a block of 4 returns, stereo returns, just decided for you. You don't have to think about them. And those are 8 channels that are taken up for you, but you don't have to think about them. They're already programmed, they're already going to work. You also have 6 auxes. Use your auxes. You know, a lot of people use them for the computers and stuff, but maybe you have handheld microphones that are just for speaking that maybe have a line output on the back. Put those handheld microphones in the back. Maybe if you're using the local inputs to the console, you can put the line output from a guitar floorboard processor. Maybe it has a line output, you can put that back here too. Use these inputs. And you also have the USB returns. I think if you render your WAV files into 16-bit PCM WAV files, it will play back files, music files, through the USB. And so you could put your pre-service music on that USB, and that way ProPresenter or whoever else doesn't have to worry about pre-service music. You can just let that music roll from the USB. It's also worth mentioning how much you can put into this space that you don't need. For example, not every member of the band needs a talkback mic. You know, it just clutters up space. I guarantee you, if you're an MD or TD watching this, or you're a worship leader, that the sound guy will much more appreciate just a stereo pre-rendered track from your backing tracks rather than splitting out 6 or 7 mono tracks that he has to somehow deal with and mix a full band around. I guarantee you he would much rather prefer a stereo track with a click cue. Or even if you have multiple keyboards patched in at one time, you do not need multiple keyboards. Keyboards fill up a certain spot in the range and you don't need 2 of them. Or putting multiple mics on the same drum, I guarantee you any sound guy would be happy to have just a single kick and just a single snare mic rather than 2 of them done improperly. So as long as you're smart and you're not trying to mic or put a line on every single little thing on stage, you should have plenty of fader space to work with. So for example, here is some fader space that I designed, and I kind of went a little bit extra on it, more than I would typically do, just to kind of give you an example of what the fader space could look like. So here are the 4 local wireless mics, and then here are the pitch correction returns for the wireless mics. So not only do I have 4 for, you know, the actual monitoring for the actual head amp process, but I'm sending signal back out through the console to a computer hosting the pitch correction, and it's coming back in right here. Bass guitar, acoustic guitar, stereo tracks, stereo keyboard, stereo guitar. And then we have drums, kick, snare, 2 toms, and hat and ride. Like I said, I'm much happier to have just a single kick and just a single snare mic compared to a kick in, kick out, and a snare in, snare out when they're not actually being done correctly. I'd much rather prefer just having the single ones. And then the click track, and also a mic dedicated for the MD. And then stereo ambience mics, And then here's my MC mics plus capacitor, and I still have 2 channels to do something with. Not only that, but I do still have also all the auxes as well. So even when I'm being a bit extra, you know, giving track stereo, key stereo, guitar stereo, more MC mics than I would ever really need, and also stereo ambience mics, giving an MD mic as well. I'm still have 2 extra spaces here, plus all the auxes to work with. So I think as long as you are conservative, you're just smart with what you mic and what you need, you shouldn't run out of fader space very easily. Now, of course, if you're working a higher level production, of course, this is a different scenario, but I think for a lot of churches, this is completely adequate. You shouldn't have to need 50 some channels, 46, 48 channels just for a standard church band. You can get a lot done with just your standard 32 plus your auxes. So I encourage you to look a little bit more at your input list, look a little bit more carefully, consider what you need. Like I say, not everyone needs a talkback mic. You don't need to split your tracks 7 different ways. You don't have to have 3 different keyboards or 2 or 3 acoustic guitars. Be a little bit more smart with your arrangements and with what you're trying to mic or what you're trying to get a line on. And I guarantee you, you not only have an easier mix, you probably won't have to buy a new console, and your sound guy will thank you that he's not having to mix 40 some inputs at one time. Now the buses. This is a criticism I see most often brought up about the console, that it only has 16 buses and that 4 of them are already dedicated for the effects. So you only really have 12 buses to work with. However, upon your first startup of the console, you might notice, if you go to the routing and the patch output, that your mains left and right are on 15 and 16. So the physical XLR outputs of the console, either built in the console or in the back, on 15 and 16, but bus 15 and 16 aren't your left and right. So that tells you that your buses do not have to correspond to outputs. So theoretically, what you could do is go to output 14, and you're going to tell that to look for main MC, which is this knob right here. Not a lot of people use this knob, but main MC, which has a fader right here. And what that's going to do is that's going to give you a subwoofer or whatever else you want to put. Maybe you have your center or your subwoofer, but now you don't have to have an aux for your subwoofer. You now have the control right here. So you say you want this channel to be, you want to send channel 1 or channel 16 into the subwoofer. You click in mono center and pull that up into the subwoofer. Now you don't have to have an aux for your subwoofer. And so let's say for bus 13, why don't we make that not for the effects, but we can just relabel that as is, not as an effects, but as a wired in-ear monitor. So now this is a wired in-ear monitor. You don't have to reroute it because you're just patching from the physical output of the console. And so now you would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stereo ears and 8 one mono ear, so 8 total ears. And so a lot of people would look at something like the SQ or the Avantis and say, well, that has so many more buses. But if you consider, this console only can process 16 physical XLR outputs at a time. So here or at the back, 16 total. The Avantis is often paired with the GX4816, and that only has 16 physical XLR sockets for outputs. And so unless you're splitting your ears, some at the front of the house and some at the rack in the back, you still only have access to 16 sockets, even with an Avantis, without having to get another stage box. Another option, instead of spending 20 grand on an Avantis setup, or maybe 10 on an SQ, why not just get another X32 or an M32R or an M32 X32 core or something like that. That way, for example, instead of having to sacrifice 15 and 16 for your left and right, and 9 and 10 for your broadcast, and maybe other things as well, maybe your subwoofer, you can have one console dedicated to just ears, and that would give you 1 through 8 and 9 through 16 total sockets for monitoring, dedicated for monitoring. So that would be 8 stereo buses. I don't know which might be more appealing to you, spending 20 grand or more on a new system, 10 or 20 grand or more on a new system, or 2 or 3 or at most 4 grand on a separate monitor console that you would just connect through AES-50B, get the inputs to line up 1-to-1, and then you have a console that can be dedicated just to monitoring. And not only that, but you can dedicate how those inputs are processed just for monitoring. So rather than having to pull off the front of house inputs for the monitoring, you would have your dedicated monitor console with processing dedicated to sound good for monitoring. And again, even with something like an Avantis or an SQ, you might still only have 16 sockets to work with if you want to keep your ears together instead of split up at front of house and at the back, or if you don't want to get multiple stage boxes. So just so you can see the process of kind of converting some of these buses into standard outputs, I'll show you how to do that. So first thing to do is I would go to your aux outputs and put these all as pre-fader. That way you can leave these down, you don't have to think about them, and your talent won't accidentally move them up or down with an app or anything. So I would set all of these to pre-fader, like this. All the way down. So up to 12 is now pre-fader, we can leave these down. For 13, let's say we want to sacrifice this effects and we want to put in a wired in-ear. So let's say we'll put in a wired in-ear right here. Again, we'll put that on pre-fader, turn the fader down, and now we just need to relabel this because we're only really using the output that bus 13 is tied to. And so bus 13 is automatically patched to output onto 13, so we just need to relabel it. So now we can mix this as we would a regular ear. However, the effects will still pull from it. So to get that effects off so that it doesn't show up on the separate part of the console over here, we can simply just label that as insert. And that way it won't show up over on the effects returns. So now we have 6 stereo ears and 1 mono ear. And so now let's say we want our subwoofer to output on to socket 14, which we don't want to correlate to actually bus 14. So output 14 on mix bus, let's going to change that to main MC. And we don't have to change this effects into an insert just to remove it off because we can still use that as an effect. The only reason we couldn't use bus 13 also as an effect is because we have to actively use the mixing of bus 13 for that in-ear, because we need the output of bus 13 to go on XLR socket 13, whereas with bus 14 we do not need what goes into bus 14 to show up on socket 14. We need something else, which is the main MC, to show up on socket 14. So we don't have to unassign 14. We can still use 14 as an effect, and also socket 14 will be our subwoofer. Or if you wanted to make it easy, you could just wipe 14 as well, turn it into a subwoofer, and then we could assign the output of 14 to just be bus 14, and now we have a standard subwoofer aux. So just using some of these outputs in some more clever ways allows us to gain some extra in-ear monitors or some extra monitoring buses while still allowing us to have the bulk of our effects. But again, as I mentioned, if you need all 16 XLR sockets for your monitoring, why spend an extra $10,000 or $20,000 and having to get another console, learn an entirely new ecosystem and in and out, entirely new surface, when you could just spend $3,000 or $4,000 at the most and get a console that can be dedicated for monitoring, and that way you could use all 16 channels, all 16 of those sockets for monitoring. And that would also free up your front of house buses to do other things as well. A lot of people like the groups and how the groups are done on the Avantis, and I think it's great too, but you can also do that with an X32 or M32 based system. Let's say I have my drums on these channels and I want to use bus 1 and 2 as a drum group. To do that, you'll select the bus, go to the home channel, and you're going to link those 2 buses. You can click main stereo on that bus. Go over to the config for the bus, and you're going to switch this to post fader, which is going to configure all the mix bus sends into this bus as post fader. And now if we go over to the sends for all the channels, you'll see for bus 1 and 2, every single thing is post fader. So now what we can do is select the bus, sends on fader, and put everything at unity, which means that the volume going into this bus will be controlled also by the main faders. And since all the faders are at unity post fader, it means it's reflected exactly 1-to-1 over here. And so now we could use this bus maybe as kind of a crush bus, or we wanted to maybe EQ it a little bit differently, or EQ the drums as a whole. We could even put an insert on them and pull in like a flanger effect or a chorus effect or something like that. Now with this setup the way it is, these faders are in parallel from each other. So if you turn these faders down, it won't turn down these faders here. This is basically additive. If you don't want these faders to go directly to the left and right, as in not being parallel to the bus but in series with the bus, you'll just simply unclick main stereo on these channels. And so now these faders are working in series with each other. If I turn down the faders here, it will completely be muted. It won't be coming through this bus here. If I turn down this fader here, while these are up, it will also be completely muted. So this way I can have this kind of like a secondary set processing for these faders to process them as a whole. But again, if you wanted to run them in parallel, you would just have the main stereo on for the faders here, just like you would be unassigning or assigning these faders on an Avantis from the mains. It's the exact same thing here. Okay, let's talk about the inserts now. The inserts are, I will admit, a bit clunky on the console, but once you get used to how to do them, it's a smooth experience. So first thing, of course, go to your effects, and let's just run to effects 5. We're going to change this into, let's say, a dual de-esser. Then on the insert, let's just say we'll have channel 15 be on the left side of the dual de-esser, and then channel 16 will be on the right side of the dual de-esser. And we'll click insert and insert to enable it, to turn it on. And so now we have 2 sides of a dual de-esser ready to go. We'll go to channel 15, scroll over to config, and you see it will naturally put the de-esser on channel 15 and then also on channel 16. So now this saves you a band when you're processing EQ from having to manually dial in a band for de-essing. Let's also talk about the assignable panel. You have 4 encoders plus 8 buttons you get assigned to do just about anything on the console. They can bring you to a page, they can adjust an effect parameter, they can do a lot of things. So how I have it set is I have 2 de-essers for vocals 1, 2, 3, and 4 set as inserts. And so if I press 5 or 6, it'll bring me to that first de-esser. If I press 7 or 8, it'll bring me to that second de-esser. And then I have the amount of high band reduction on 1, 2, 3, and 4. Encoders 1, 2, 3, and 4, of course corresponding to vocals 1, 2, 3, and 4. Button 9 brings me to the master channel strip meters. 10 is the tap tempo for the echo, and then 11 and 12 are the mute for the echo returns. You don't actually have to have 11 and 12 be on a stereo side. You could have 12 be a different mute altogether, because if you mute the left, it'll naturally just mute the right as well. So I could also mute a reverb or a chorus or something else with 12. Let's talk about P16s. In addition to this console having a fairly large number of outputs, if you're just clever about how you're routing them and using them, the P16s could absolutely skyrocket how many monitors you have without having a dedicated monitor console. They automatically assign direct out pre-EQ. What I would suggest is pre-fader. That way your talent doesn't have to dial in like a low cut or something like that for a vocal mic. It can pull off the cleanup that you do for those vocal mics at front of house, rather than all that bass and low end rumble from a vocal mic, or maybe all of the extra resonance from a drum kit doesn't get through their ears to the P16s. Any cleanup you do in regards to that kind of stuff at front of house will get sent into the P16s as well if you click in pre-fader on these. Now with the P16s, you only have 16 outputs you can use. So again, this is where you have to be smart and think about what you might want to put on those outputs, because you can't put all 32 channels on, you can only put 16. So you can be smart, you can be clever about with what goes where. So for example, you could do the 4 pre-correction inputs, and vocalists do not need to monitor off any pitch correction inputs. It would throw off their pitch, so they need to monitor off the 4 correction inputs. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 for the band. The drums can be on a bus, that would be 13, 14, and then 15 and 16 for the talkback and the click cue. You could run the drums into a mono bus and possibly bus together your click track and MD mic as well, and that would allow you to run stereo ambience mics into the P16s as well. Just to recap, I'm merely suggesting that this console can do a lot more, it has a lot more going for it than some people give it credit for. Sometimes I think people might get caught up in the feature set of newer consoles without considering what they actually need and what they're actually going to use on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis. This console is able to output 7 ears plus a subwoofer and a left and right while still having room for 2 or 3 effects. But if you need more buses or you need more monitor outputs, there's always the option of just getting another console and digitally patching the inputs 1-to-1 so that you have 16 total sockets you could use, plus also using the P16. And again, rather than spending multiple more thousands of dollars just to have to learn a new system to work with a new surface, consider more carefully the kind of inputs you really need and the kind of outputs you really need. Again, I'm not saying this is a perfect console, nor am I saying that other consoles aren't as good. I'm merely suggesting that this console does a lot more and is capable of a lot more than many people give it credit for. And that its criticisms might be a little bit overblown, and that the benefits of other consoles might also be a bit overblown as well. So I hope that this video has allowed you to look at these consoles and these systems kind of in a new way, and to hopefully consider some new or out-of-the-box solutions in regards to your audio needs. Thank you for watching.